Hello and welcome back. We have we're starting the second track of the day, which is related to indie funding. This track is sponsored by Green Horse Games. We'll also end at the very end of the day with a panel that is dedicated to indie funding and all things indie. So to kick things off, please welcome Bobby Wertheim from Kando Factory.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me, guys. So pros and cons of different indie funding sources. I'm sure everyone's had a vision for a game, set it all out, and then the release game's a bit different to your initial vision. That's kind of what happened to this deck. I end up talking about other stuff, but hopefully it's useful and interesting. And if there's stuff you want to take photos of the slides, feel free to take photos. If you want this deck, ping me on LinkedIn. I have my QR code on the last slide. So just connect with me there, say I want the slides, and I'll be happy to share it with you. So this is what we'll cover today. I think I'm being a bit ambitious to say 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. If we can, let's do some Q&A at the end. I like to do Q&As at the end if it's possible, but we'll see if we've got time. So who is this guy? This is my career in a slide. I started off life as an antique dealer, basically. I did other stuff as well. But I started at PlayStation in the games industry as a QA tester at PlayStation. Heavy Rain was my first ever game that I worked on. Stayed there for a couple of years, then moved to Sega, and I was there for about 10.5 years. And there was 3 phases of my career there. So I started in production, doing producery stuff. I think my first game at Sega might have been Sonic Generations. I was basically Mr. Sonic for a few years. And then I did more corporate development, strategy, process, creating franchise roadmaps, midterm plans, and being the kind of go-between between the wholly owned studios at Sega and the mothership in Japan. And then my final time at Sega was the last from 2016. I was a co-founding team member of a team called Searchlight, and I became the face of Sega to the indie community. And I was basically hunting for great games to publish and studios to acquire. And then I did much the same thing at Curve Games, and then I founded Kando Factory 2 years ago. And I did do a 10-month stint as a partner at Nocturne Games during that time. And Nocturne Games was, it was set out to be a really revolutionary, rev-based fund for indies. The idea was to become the antidote for the games industry. We raised a few million, but we couldn't raise enough millions. So ultimately, we had to disband the team. So I'm fully focused on Kando Factory today. But that kind of experience has given me a really good idea of what it takes to publish games and how VCs and investors look at games as well. So that's predominantly what we'll talk about today. This is the Kando team, including me. There's 6 people. We do a lot of consulting work for publishers, from revenue forecasting, strategy, process, scouting games. We do all sorts of stuff for publishers because between us we've got a lot of experience in publishing, basically. And I've worked with everyone at previous incarnations of our lives at previous companies. And so we've got almost 100 years experience in the team of publishing games. Last year we had 8 games signed by publishers. We've been to a bunch of events and have talked to hundreds of studios during that time. And this slide's a little bit out of date. There's more clients now that we've had and do have today, but anyway. And then pros and cons by funding source. So to get into the meat of things, I've separated it into 4 different buckets, right? And probably the most relevant out of this lot is these 2 to everyone in the audience. So we'll focus on those. But if you can take a moment to just read this slide while I just talk over it, because I don't think I've got enough time to literally go through everything. But what I want to talk about is, first of all, if there's government support available, take it. Really maximize it. That will strengthen your position when you talk to investors, when you talk to publishers, or even if you're going to self-publish. And usually they offer the best deal terms out there. There might be some constraints, but generally speaking, it's really, really good to take part in that stuff. So really leverage it if it's available to you. And the other thing that I want to talk about on this slide is the kind of worldview of publishers and investors. They're quite different. So publishers are doing project financing for rev share, right? And they typically don't have an ownership of the studio. They don't really have like anything really long term. So they want the game to be really successful. And they're well practiced at releasing games. And they usually have quite a big team to create an environment of success for the game. You know, it might be marketing, community, market research, you know, QA, localization, biz dev, blah, 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 right? But they've usually got quite a big infrastructure to be able to provide that know-how and service above and beyond the money that they provide to the studio. So they can be a really good partner to work with to maximize the potential of the game. And if the game fails, while they might, sometimes they go for co-ownership of IP or ownership of IP, even if they don't have any ownership of the IP, like in the truest sense, they'll usually have rights to the IP, right? Like sequel, prequel, spin-off rights. So they really want that game to succeed. And because of that, and because there's so much at stake for them, because if the game fails, they have nothing to fall back on, sometimes they can be really hands-on in a good way. Sometimes they can be really hands-on in a way that's a bit toxic too. But I think that's less likely to happen, but you do hear about those things happening. Conversely, investors, they're investing for equity. So they like obviously want the game to succeed because that's like the first foothold into the success of the company's growth and scale. But even if the game fails, from their perspective, they still have ownership on the company, right? There's now an established team. There's probably an established audience, a community, an IP, some tech, a pipeline, right? A culture in the team. So there's something to continue on with above and beyond that initial sort of kind of release of the game. And if you look at banks, like banks always win. They're always going to have some kind of guarantee, some kind of asset. It might be your house, it might be whatever, right? But they're always going to win. So publishers are like the most at risk of failure of these groups of people in a way. Because like from a government perspective, you know, while they've funded you, you're paying taxes, the economy is growing, so they're always going to win as well from their own unique lens too. So, like, I think publishers don't talk about this enough, about like why they have this view and why they behave in the way that they behave. And sometimes it can lead to bad behaviors. A lot of the time, they're trying to do the right thing though. So if you understand where they're coming from, it can be quite helpful to create a successful partnership. So let's dig into publishers and investors a little bit more, right? So publishers, again, project financing. So if you're pitching to a publisher, you obviously have to talk about the project. You should talk about the game, the USPs, who the potential audience is so they understand if it's a match with their community, with their existing portfolio. That's the focal point, right? Whereas investors, not so much about the game. Obviously talk about the game, but you want to talk about like the vision of the company, how you're going to scale, what the exit story is, who's the leadership team, like who are the founders, how credible are you to deliver that vision and execute on that vision, right? So you can't really use the same pitch to these two very, very different groups of people. It has to be a different pitch. And in terms of deal closing speed, publishers, like I mentioned earlier, they're quite big in terms of like the team, and they might have like different layers of approval to go through. So they typically take a bit longer to close a deal. So from initial pitch to like execution of a contract, it could take 6 months, right? That's often seen to be like the industry average in the length of time it takes to close a publishing deal. Conversely, investors, they're usually managing a fund, and they're kind of like managing the fund by taking a small percentage of the fund, of the management fee of the fund. So they're usually like very small in terms of size. It might be like 3 people, 5 people, right? Like it's tiny, right? Otherwise, the fund management fee becomes too expensive, unless the fund is like millions, like huge, like hundreds of millions. So because it's a smaller team, usually it's a bit quicker to close those deals. It might be like 3 to 6 months. And in terms of like how frequent your funding is, typically a publishing deal will come with a milestone schedule. It might be monthly milestones. It might be every 2 months, like bi-monthly milestones. It could be less frequent, but typically you're looking at a month to 2 months sort of like milestone schedules, very, very typical. They like to keep a close leash on the project, right? And manage and track the project closely. Investors, it might just be like a lump sum investment. It might be in big tranches as well, but it will nowhere near be as frequent as a publisher's sort of like frequency of funding. And if you run out of funds during development with a publisher, there's often some kind of change control procedure where you could look to get that extra funding to get the game over the line. With investors, it's less likely for that to happen. It's a much longer conversation for that to happen. And in terms and ownership, so there's no standard publishing deal, but like if I tried and I've looked at a lot of contracts. I've also represented studios as an agent, and I've having all those games signed as a scout as well and stuff. Like I've seen a lot of contracts, and they vary massively. But it could be anywhere between like the publisher taking 15% of the rev share, all the way up to say 70 or even 80% of the rev share. Like it's like I'll talk about this more later actually, but that's kind of like a good kind of range. I mean, it's a huge range. And then investors, it's usually 10 to 25% when you first go out there to raise money for your company. I mean, it always depends, right? There's like huge caveats here. It depends on how much revenue you've got coming in, what kind of assets you have, what kind of team you have, and how much you're raising. But like 10 to 25% seems like a good sort of like standard amount to expect to have to give away when you fundraise initially. The additional value that a publisher brings is huge. They really do try to create an environment of success. It could be all of those things that I've listed there. With investors, it might be more like strategic, directional advice. They might be able to open doors for you and introduce you to people and give you the warm intro that's needed for things to happen. But they won't be so hands-on. Like they cannot be hands-on, right? Because they're investing in so many things and it's a tiny team. And they're not set up to do that kind of stuff, to be honest. So very, very limited in terms of the help that you get above and beyond that initial funding that you might raise. And then the project involvement, I kind of talked about, so I'll skip over that. And then the duration of engagement. If your game takes 2 years to develop and a publisher's funding throughout that 2-year period, and it's another 2 years to realize the lifetime value of the game, I mean, it might be a 4-year engagement for the initial sort of publishing deal that you have. With investors, a really quick exit might be like 3 years, but typically they're looking at exiting 5 or even 10 years after the investment. It's a much longer engagement. And so should you get a publisher? Should you seek investment? Or should you self-fund, right? It's impossible to say. I think it entirely depends on your situation. But like, here's a few things that I think you should be aware of within the kind of indie, PC, console, premium game sort of side of things. I think everybody in the indie PC world has seen this graph. If you haven't, it's probably because you're from the mobile side of the business. It might not be that daunting if you're from the mobile side of the business, but it is mental what's going on. It's a lot of games that came out last year. And how big it is within the context of things, right? It's huge because last year we saw almost 20% of the entirety of Steam's catalog released in 1 year. And then Valve did like a report at the beginning of this year about the playtime and the player behavior and such on Steam. And it was only like 15% of the playtime was on 2024 games last year. So 85% of the playtime was on older games, like catalog games, right? Huge games, really good games, quite often like with a price promotion going on. So there's a lower barrier to entry, and there's all these amazing reviews of people saying, this game's amazing, right? So it is a challenging market. I think it's undeniable that it's still a challenging market today. And I think these are the kind of key reasons of why we're facing the headwind that we're facing. And I don't think a lot of these have been cured yet, to be honest. So I know I'm being a bit doom and gloomy, but like we have to kind of face the reality that these things have caused the situation that we're in today. Like I think the consolidation, all the M&As that happened were great when it was happening, especially to people who did acquire or who got acquired. They're probably popping the champagne, right? And be like, well, we did the thing. But what that means is, like with publishers being bought out by other bigger groups, like for the first few years, it's fine, it's business as usual. But after that, there's going to be some kind of efficiency, some kind of optimization that happens, and then there's less publishers to pitch to effectively, right? And then the interest rate changing and going up around the world. I think because the interest rate was basically zero, it meant that there was more money coming into our industry. People were wanting to invest, but now it's like, well, actually, I could just make 5% if I did nothing, right? And then the stagnation in the distribution channel, like we haven't seen an innovation happen in the distribution channel for quite a while. And a lot of these platforms that have existed for a while are persistent, like Steam, right? You're going up against all these older games on Apple, on Google Play Store, whatever. They're all persistent. So it's like, unless this kind of change happens, I think a change needs to happen. And then the end of free money. So like, when these platform holders were setting up these new business models like Game Pass, PS Plus, and Stadia was there for a while as well, and Amazon with Luna and blah, blah, blah. There was a lot of free money floating around. That's basically dried up, right? It's still there, but it's definitely less significant compared to what it was, like, say, 3 years ago. So publishers and investors are still signing games. They're still investing in companies. The frequency of their deployment is lower, and their ticket sizes are lower, right? And what you have to bear in mind is, like, the situation has changed a bit. There's, like, so many games being released, so many games also being pitched. So let's say if you're talking to a publisher, and there's a game, 3 games, and all the 3 games have the same level of investment. They're coming out at the same time, and they have the same market opportunity. But one is a paper pitch. Another one has a prototype. And the other one has a prototype with wish lists and a Discord community, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, they're going to pick the latter, right? So today, a lot of publishers are putting that sort of onus of proving the product market fit on the studio. Like, it's not like they're doing it on purpose, but that's kind of what's happening. Like, when I first started signing games, I was signing games for millions and millions, like really big budget stuff, and I was finding paper pitches. But those days are gone. Like, it's like very rare to hear about a paper pitch being signed today. It's more commonplace to hear about games being signed that already have a huge amount of momentum, right? And they're tightening their purse strings. So people who used to invest up to $1 million, now they're investing like $500,000, right? And there's not many publishers out there today who are signing games beyond 10 million, right? So it's like people are a bit more risk averse. And they're snowed under with pitches. Like, they can't handle all of these games coming their way, right? And they're trying to get through it as quickly as possible and trying to be responsive, but they're being pitched left, right, and center. So the bar has gone up. Like, it really, really has gone up. I do a different talk about what's the ultimate pitch. But yeah, I think, like, you have to be really sort of like locked in on how you pitch to people today versus, say, 3 years ago. This is like the evaluation funnel to signature that I've averaged out over the past, 8 years or so of like scouting games. For me to sign one game, I typically have looked at 450 game pitches, right? It's like, it's always been that way for me. That's never changed. And there's only so many games I can see in the year. Usually my batting average is about 3,500 to 5,000 game pitches a year that I can get through properly, right? So you are really going up against like a lot of other pitches is what you have to bear in mind. So if you're looking for a publisher, I think you need to gain an unfair advantage, right? And how do you do that? You do that, like I mentioned before, by proving there's a product market fit. Maybe set up a Steam store page. Maybe start doing a call to action and start building hyper momentum, right? If a publisher's interested in your game, if you've already sort of announced it to the world in a way by putting up a Steam store page, before it was a big deal. It was like, nah, I'm not touching it. It was a deal breaker. But today it's not. It's not at all. If anything, if you've managed to build hyper momentum, it's a huge advantage over someone who hasn't, right? And find a way to get to the top of the pile. So like by that, what do I mean? I mean, if you, like, let's say, are applying for a job and you found a company website with a vacancy that you want to apply to, and you apply via the website, you don't know if they've actually looked at your CV, right? It's the same if you like just fill in a form for a publisher and you go, hey, look at my game. It's like it's just gone into the ether, right? But if you know someone who knows someone there, like you know the hiring manager of the vacancy in the company that's got that vacancy, and you get a warm intro to them, then you know you're at the top of the pile. They've seen your CV. It's the same thing here. So I would try and get a warm introduction into a publisher and make sure you are seen. Or maybe, so just network, right? Just network hard. Like, doing an event like this is really good, and just like fill your sort of event schedules throughout the year with events that you could attend. It doesn't always have to be GDC. It could be like a digital only event, right? There's like a huge democratization to sort of networking and meeting top tier investors and top tier publishers that wasn't really available a few years ago today. So, try and get to the top of the pile and meet people face to face. Like even if it's online, I still consider that practically face to face. Like try and find a way to do that. And do your research before pitching to publishers. For the hot leads, do that. Like you can't do it to all of them, but if you like identify, say, 100 publishers or investors that you want to pitch to, and there's a bunch that you're like, all right, this is my top 10. Like literally go to their website, listen to any podcasts or videos or whatever interviews they've done. Listen out for the keywords that they mention about what excites them, what's given them the success that they've had, and layer that into your pitch. And as you're talking to them, use the language that they use. It's like a classic sales technique, but definitely try and like customize a bit for your really, really hot leads. I've got 5 minutes left. Shit. Rev share. So there's no standard publishing deal, right? It really comes down to but there is like a spectrum. So the less money that they're investing, the less rev share they should obviously receive. And the more money they're investing, the more rev share that they'll ask for. And the more kind of rights that they'll ask for on top of the rev share. And like typical indie deal, I think, for PC console world is like up to $1 million investment into dev funding. Maybe the publisher fully recoups first and then takes 50-50. There's a few kind of like public contracts that you can review. But yeah, I think that's like a typical indie deal, even today. But like, I don't think you can say one's a good deal or bad deal just based on rev share. And I don't think one's a good deal or bad deal even if you consider everything else in the contract. Really, ultimately, if you're pointing at a contract during your relationship and going, yeah, look, it says this in the contract, something's gone really wrong in that relationship, and it's probably not a good deal, right? Like, you want to make sure that you really get to know the people that you might work with for the next few years. Don't just rely on having a good relationship with one or two people, like the scout from that publisher or the producer from that publisher, because people leave, man. And so you want to talk to the guy that's running that company, right? The woman, the guy, sorry. But like whoever it is that's running the company, make sure you get on with that person and your values align, right? Because then that person probably isn't going to leave anytime soon. And then key deal terms, these are some of the key deal terms. I usually spend a good few minutes on this, but I think what you should do is be really curious, be really inquisitive. It's totally fine to ask questions when you're negotiating deals with people and negotiate, right? You're a business person, it's your responsibility for all of your staff and your team and yourself to make sure you sign a deal that works well for your company. So you're completely within your rights to really interrogate and try and get the best deal possible. And there's always going to be some kind of middle ground that you can find, right? So like, let's take, I don't know, like the top one, region. If they ask for worldwide rights, like you should be asking them, what are you going to do in China? What team do you have in China? How are you going to exploit that market? Because it's a huge market. If you don't have anything there, like why should you have worldwide rights, right? And if they're asking for like 5-year, 10-year kind of publishing rights, like why? Like, what are you going to do during that period? Like, you should just be asking, like, what's the intent behind this deal term, right? Some stuff, they'll just come back to you and go, that's just our standard deal term, and we're not changing it, right? But it doesn't hurt to ask and understand what the intent is behind all of these things. So what does selling a game on Steam look like? If you're selling a game on Steam and it sells for X many dollars, let's say it's $15, Steam will take a 30% platform cut. Then there's like taxes, and then there's returns. And typically, like the average return rate on Steam is around 10%. But a good game, I would say the average return rate is more like 5%. So if you're seeing 10% or more returns of your game, like something's really wrong, and you need to try and fix it, right? And And Valve effectively encouraged people to do price promotion because it's algorithmic, because it's not really like a place where you can buy advertisement space. So over the life of a game, like even from day one, you'll see a game discounted at 10 to 20% on launch. And through the life cycle, deeper discounts, right? So like over a 2 to 3 year period, I'd say the average typical selling price of your game is maybe 30, 40% lower than your actual SRP, right? So if we break this down, if you've got a $15 game, actually, you're probably going to get like $6 per unit at the end of it. And that's before any kind of publisher cut. And that's before all of your kind of company taxes that you have to pay yourself eventually. And that's not even considering what happens if the game sells really well in a territory where the SRP is typically lower, like in China or Russia or whatever it might be, right? So there's like, this is like a simplified view of what happens when you sell a game on Steam. But I think it's really good to kind of take that in and understand it. I've got to stop because I'm out of time. But here's like a few...
Wait.
Have I got time?
We can do like 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes?
Skip it a bit. Yeah.
All right, I'll try to go through really quickly. So like, if we have a scenario where you're asking for 300K dev funding, a publisher might put in like 200K to publish the game. And let's say it's full recoup and then 50-50 is your deal terms. You know, what would happen if the game sold for, like, it did 300K revenue across 2 to 3 years? Like, the publisher loses out money, right? You've been paid your milestones, so you'll probably be a bit fine, but then after that, you don't receive a penny of royalty, right? So it's total failure. If the game does like $1 million revenue, it's probably break even. So if you're pitching a game and you're saying, hey, I need 300K and I think it will make $1 million, don't pitch that because they will never sign it because for them, that's break even, right? And that's like a waste of everyone's time from their perspective. If you're pitching a game for 300K, like this is when it starts to get interesting, right? When it does like 3 million revenue. That's when it's like a publisher is like actually going to listen and take it seriously. And even then, we're not talking huge success here. This is like acceptable level of success from a publisher's perspective with those deal terms, with that level of investment. Here's some helpful resources. So if you want to put together a list of publishers to hit up, Google Saeed. Literally just Google what it says on the top of the slide and you'll find this list. It's really, really useful. Create a hot list out of this really long list for yourself. Customize your pitch for the really hot leads. Here's some more useful resources you can use. Like Newzoo does periodical free reports that you can get to understand the external landscape about the audiences, and you can then kind of do your own positioning off the back of it and stuff. There's a bunch of websites you can use to get analytics. I personally really like Gamealytic. Game Discover Co is really good as well. They basically use, like, I think similar data to Gamealytic, but they've got more features. So I really like Game Discover Co. They've got a Game Discover Co newsletter, which is free. So sign up for that if you haven't already. And then Gamecraft podcast is really, really good. It gives you a good understanding of like the history of video games and what's happening today and what might happen in the future. If you want to understand how you fill your event scheduling, go to gameconfguide.com. It's brilliant. It also kind of outlines what awards are happening throughout the year and when you need to submit by to be eligible for the awards. Raw Fury's got their own contract up on their website, so you can check out their full contract, and it's been like translated in loads of languages as well. If you're thinking of self-publishing, go to Pantaloon. They've got some cool stuff up there that will be really useful for you to understand. And if you want to look for a publisher, Pitchify is really good, so register there. It's basically free to register. And then a bunch of publishers are there to kind of look for games on that website. So hopefully there's some useful stuff there for you to walk away from. This is my QR code for LinkedIn. So if you want the pitch, let me know. Hit me up and just say, can I have the, not pitch, sorry. If you want the presentation, just ask me. And I'll send you a link for it, and you can take a look in your own time. Sorry, I ran over time.
No, all good, all good. This is important stuff, so it's absolutely worth spending the time on it. We have like a couple of minutes until the next speaker comes back. Let's take one or two questions from the audience. Anyone? Okay, we have one.
Do you do mobile?
I don't, sorry. Yeah.
So I've got one. And I actually meant to ask it earlier. When, for somebody that is launching a game on Steam, when do you recommend the demo to be published? How long before the release of the game to release the demo?
It's a good one. I think it depends really on your game and your situation. You're like, you want to make sure that you've got a demo out I would say at least minimum 3 months before the launch, right? Ideally longer, like 6 months maybe even, and start to build your audience, start to build momentum, get feedback from people. Like the more time you have to respond to that feedback, the better, and the more time you have to build momentum, the better. Bear in mind that you can only do Steam Next Fest once, right? So like that's like a golden bullet that you don't want to do it too early, basically. And when you do it, you want to do it right. So, yeah, I'd say maybe 6 months is a good barometer.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Bobby. And we'll hear more from Bobby at the panel, during the panel at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.